The first thing anyone noticed was how small the men looked against all that white. On the main screen in the forward operating base war room, helmet cameras shook and jittered as a dozen figures tried to become part of the snow. The image cut from one view to another, a pair of boots digging frantically for purchase behind a rock, a rifle barrel peeking over a drift, a gloved hand slapping a fresh magazine in place. Over all of it came the flat, distant sound of gunfire picked up by strained microphones, like popcorn under ice. "Zoom on third squad," someone called. The feeds jumped. The sun flared off the snow so bright the auto exposure hunted back and forth, blowing the world out to white and then snapping it down to a harsh, blue-shadowed landscape. On the right of the valley, a jagged ridgeline loomed, dark rock and ice forming teeth above the patrol. On the left, the slope rose more gently, but every few seconds the muzzle flash winked from the outcrops there and trace around stitched orange lines through the air. On one camera, a soldier was half crawling, half dragging himself behind a knee-high boulder. Red soaked through his thigh, spreading across the snow in thick streaks that looked almost black on the washed-out feed. His breathing rasped over the audio. "Echo 1-1, say again last." The platoon leader's voice crackled through the speakers bolted to the walls. "Say again. We have 1 urgent surgical. 2. I say again, 2 litter." His words dissolved into static, chopped up by the staccato hammering of a machine gun and the flat thump of a mortar round detonating somewhere off-screen. The image shook as the camera's wearer flinched. Around the room, officers leaned over consoles and analysts stabbed fingers at map overlays. The central display showed a top-down view of the valley, contour lines and satellite imagery merged into a single digital landscape. Blue icons marked the recon platoon's position, clustered tightly together on the valley floor. Red diamonds began popping up along the ridgeline, linked by faint arcs and cones indicating fields of fire. "It's a bowl," muttered one of the intelligence analysts, dragging his fingertips across the tablet. "High ground on 3 sides." They walked right into a kill box. "We can see that." Colonel Hayes didn't raise his voice, but it cut through the babble like a knife. He stood near the center of the room, boots planted, gray hair shaved close, jaw clenched so hard the cord stood out in his neck. His eyes never left the main screen. "So, mortars are bracketing," the fires officer said, not quite hiding the quiver in his voice. "First round's short. Next salvo will be right on their heads unless they displace. Then get them out of there." Hayes turned toward the comms console. "Standard break contact drills. Smoke, bound back along Route Sierra. Push them to the east spur. Use that as your egress. Echo 1-1, this is War Room. Execute break Sierra. Acknowledge." He waited for the affirmation that usually came within seconds. Instead, the speakers hissed. "Break, copy. Break, ra, taking." The platoon leader's words broke in half, scrambled, then vanished under a rising wall of static. The comms tech winced and twisted a knob, then another. Green bars on his screen dropped into yellow, then red. "Sir, we're losing them," he said. "Signal strength is dropping inside the valley." It's like he stopped, checking another panel. "Satellite links dirty over that grid. Long range is all but gone. Short range is spotty." Hey, step closer. "We had clear signal 10 minutes ago." "Yes, sir. Look here." The text split the map, overlaying a faint circle over the valley floor. "There's a localized interference bubble building. Pattern fits a wideband jammer. That truck we picked up on thermal last night. This might be it." The word jammer rippled through the room. Heads turned. Someone swore softly. On one of the secondary screens, a new feed flicked on, grainy, high angle, the view from a small reconnaissance drone. The patrol was a scatter of dark shapes in a flat white expanse. Snow geezered up around them in regular pulses as mortars walked their way down the valley, each blast leaving a black crater rimmed with frozen mist. Another window in the mosaic of screens showed a squat farmhouse half buried in snow at the far edge of the valley. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Through a zoomed lens, figures were visible behind boarded-up windows, faces pale and round with fear. "There are civilians up there," an analyst said, pointing. "Family of 4. They refused to evacuate last month." Mortar patterns creeping toward them, the fires officer said. So, if those rounds over-travel the patrol, we're not dropping counter-battery on that ridgeline with a farmhouse in the arc, Hayes snapped. We don't know how many civilians are up there. We keep fire organic. They get out the old-fashioned way. He was already turning options in his head. Alternate routes, hasty assaults up the flank, calling for the birds to push in early, when he noticed someone standing still near the back wall. She was partly in shadow, beside the coffee urn and a rack of headsets, just another figure in worn winter gear and a faded jacket. Dark hair braided tight against her neck, face windburned from days outside. She held no rank, wore no patches, carried no tablet. Her eyes, though, never stopped moving. Mara Quinn watched the screens like a rancher watching a sky darken over a herd. On the main feed from the valley floor, she picked out details others weren't looking for. The crust pattern of the snow where men had walked, the way loose powder trailed off certain drifts, the sharp angle of shadows under outcrops in the mid-morning sun. On the drone view, she traced lines in the air with her finger, following faint depressions where old trails lay buried, seeing the shape of the land the way she did from horseback. Hayes caught her in his peripheral vision, then turned fully. "Quinn," he said, voice clipped. "You know this valley. What do you see?" A few of the staff glanced back at her with thin smiles. Just the guide. The woman who checked fences and water lines and occasionally told them when a road was about to wash out. The one they'd attached to the patrol with the unspoken assumption that she would walk, point, and keep quiet. Mara didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved from the drone feed to the topo overlay, then to the red diamonds on the ridgeline. She noticed where the enemy had dug in and where they hadn't. She noticed the sloping line of an avalanche chute the map smoothed out, and the untouched ribbon of snow on the valley floor that looked, to her, like bait. "I see men who can't move," she said finally. Her voice was low, steady enough that people had to quiet to hear it. The murmur in the room dipped. "I see guns on 3 sides. They've been walked into a corral someone built just for today. We know it's a kill box," the operations major said with a touch of impatience. "The question is how we break them out. The question is why you sent them in there blind," she said, eyes never leaving the screen. The major flushed. "We had drone coverage. We had coverage that went bad the moment they crossed that line." She tapped the edge of the interference bubble, the border where comms had dissolved. "Your birds saw what they wanted you to see. They left you a clean valley to stroll through, and you took it." Hayes' jaw twitched, but he didn't cut her off. "We're past blame," he said. "I need a recommendation. Options that keep my people alive." In the farmhouse feed, a little girl's face appeared between slats, eyes widened at the sound of another mortar round landing closer. On a helmet camera, a medic pressed his hands into a bleeding chest, shouting for more gauze. Mara exhaled slowly. She could taste stale coffee and recycled air and something else, metallic, like the cold outside somehow leaking in. "You won't save them with the book," she said. "Those routes you're pointing at, every one of them runs through snow the enemy packed for themselves. They know where you're going before you start." "Then what do you suggest?" the intel officer asked, exasperated. "We can't just teleport them out." She let the beat hang, feeling the weight of the stairs around her. She thought of the ridgeline above the valley, of the old cattle trails only the locals used, of her father's hand on her shoulder when she was 10, pointing at the same slopes and saying, "You can ride where other folks think you can't, if you know how it's built under the snow." Hayes stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Quinn," he said, and there was something like plea under the command. "I need something now." Mara finally turned from the screens and met his gaze. In that moment, the room felt very small. The screens, the consoles, the maps all squeezed to the edges by the intensity between them. Her voice barely rose above normal speech, but it carried to every corner. "So," she said, "I'll do it my way, or you'll lose them all." A second of stunned silence. Then the room erupted. "You can't be serious," the operations major blurted. "She's not even. She's a civilian," one of the planners said. "She's not cleared for." "She's a guide," another added, as if that settled it. We can't put a rifle in her hands and send her into an active. Hayes raised his hand. The voices died off, though the disapproval stayed etched on faces. You've got a better idea, he asked quietly, looking from officer to officer. No one answered. The feeds kept rolling behind him, the wounded soldier clawing himself behind inadequate cover, the little farmhouse shaking in the concussion of another near miss, the blue icons on the map inching toward the edge of the interference bubble and then stopping, pinned. He turned back to Mara. There was something resigned in his eyes, and something like anger, though it didn't seem aimed at her. What does your way look like? He asked. Not from in here, she said. From up there. She nodded toward the mountain visible through the narrow window at the far end of the room, its ridge a white knife against the sky. You let me go where they think no one can come from. You stop shouting at a valley that can't hear you and give me a rifle instead. A few officers actually laughed. She thinks she's a sniper now, one muttered under his breath, not quietly enough. Hayes heard it. His gaze flicked that way, then back to her. He was out of time and he knew it. Rules? He asked. I use what I know, she said. I don't wait for your confirmation on every move. You watch my locator, but you don't try to steer my feet from behind a screen. And when I say something needs to happen, you do it. He stared at her for one more beat, then nodded, the motion sharp like it pained him. Get her a weapon and whatever she asks for, he said. Log it under my authorization. The protest started again, weaker this time, more about covering themselves than genuine objection. Mara didn't wait for them to finish. She stepped away from the wall, passing between desks and bodies, heading for the armory door without looking back. On a rack, she pulled down a rifle she had trained with before, metal worn shiny along the stock from other hands. She grabbed a battered pack from a hook, shrugged into it like it was a familiar coat, and checked the magazines the quartermaster pushed across the counter. Outside the war room's glass, the loading ramp yawned open. Wind drove thin sheets of snow through the gap, sparkling in the artificial lights. Engines rumbled distant, the sound of a snowcat warming up. As she moved down the corridor, someone thrust a locator beacon into her palm. She clipped it to her harness without breaking stride. Behind her, Hayes stood again in the center of the war room, watching a new icon appear on the map. The small, blue triangle tagged Quinem, moving toward the edge of the base and the blank space beyond. Echo 1-1. This is War Room. He tried again into the MIC. We are working a solution. Sit tight. Pop smoke and mark your position. We're coming for you. Static snarled back at him. On screen, another mortar round hit close enough to turn the world into a whiteout for 3 long seconds. Mara stepped onto the loading ramp. The cold hit like a slap, stealing her breath, needling her cheeks. The snowcat waited outside, treads half-buried, exhaust pluming. The driver gave her a skeptical look, but she swung up beside him, rifle across her knees. They drove out into the blinding brightness. The base fell away behind them, a cluster of low buildings shrinking to toys against the immensity of the valley mouth. The sky was a hard, washed-out blue. The mountains ahead were all teeth and shadow. In the war room, conversations thinned and then stopped as more and more eyes shifted away from the pinned patrol's feeds to the single, new icon inching toward the rough line of the valley. The noise of overlapping voices gave way to the clack of keys, the hum of electronics, the intermittent bark of distant gunfire through speakers. The snowcat ground to a halt at the last plowed berm. Mara jumped down, boots sinking to mid-calf in powder. The wind whipped her braid against her shoulder, tugged at her coat, tried to steal the heat from her bones. She adjusted the sling of the rifle, shifted the weight of her pack, and started walking toward the ridge, a solitary figure disappearing into a world of white. In the war room, the only sound for a long moment was the faint hiss of the vac and the soft, relentless tick of the clock on the wall. 36 hours earlier, the valley had been just another feature on a map. 24 hours earlier, it had been the backdrop to a conversation on a porch. The day before, the snow on the ranch had looked almost gentle. From atop the ridge line that divided her family's grazing land from the high country, you could see for miles. Fences ran like pencil lines across the fields below, posts poking through drifts. Cattle clustered where feed had been scattered, dark shapes moving slow, chewing steam into the air. Beyond them rose foothills flecked with stands of pine, and beyond those, the mountains sprang up, white and jagged and indifferent. Mara lay prone on the makeshift shooting bench her father had built years ago, cheek against the worn stock of her rifle. Metal gongs of different sizes were set up on posts along the slope opposite her, shining dull where the paint had been knocked off by previous hits. She breathed in through her nose. Cold air filled her lungs, edged with the faint smell of hay and diesel from the barns behind her. Through the scope, the world squeezed down to a circle containing a single, square steel plate at 400 yards. Snow dust twitched in the air halfway between her and the target, eddies of fine powder dancing across the slope. Heat shimmer rose barely off the sunlit drifts, a soft, wavering veil that made the edges of rocks blur and dance. She held her breath at the bottom of a slow exhale and let years of habit flow through her muscles. Wind off the northwest, light but steady, mirage bending just a hair to the right. Cold metal under her finger. The shot cracked sharp in the cold. The recoil nudged her shoulder. A heartbeat later, a clear, ringing clang drifted back from the steel, echoing faintly between the low hills. Again, she murmured, mostly to herself. She cycled the bolt, chambered another round, shifted her aim to a smaller plate farther up. Her father had taught her that way. Never leave well enough alone. If a shot was comfortable, move on to one that wasn't. By the time the first truck from the convoy crested the ranch road and crunched its way along the iced ruts toward the house, she had worked her way through all the plates at varying ranges. She didn't stand immediately. She watched the vehicles for a moment, measuring their weight by the way the tires carved into the snow. Green paint, antennas, a trailer with a generator, and in the middle, one armored vehicle with the command antenna cluster on top. She sighed, popped the bolt back and flagged the rifle safe, then pushed herself up onto her knees. Snow clung to her elbows and the front of her jacket. She brushed it off as she stood. By the time she reached the yard, the first of the soldiers were already spilling out, stamping their boots and pulling their collars up against the cold. The engineers eyed the distant ridge where the relay station sat disguised as a weather shack, its tiny tower barely visible against the white backdrop. Colonel Hayes stepped down from the armored vehicle. He wore the same winter kit as everyone else, but he somehow looked more formal, like he'd pressed the creases into the snow itself. His gaze flicked around the ranch yard. Barns, house, pens, cataloging, assessing. "Mara," he said by way of greeting. "Colonel." She hitched the rifle up on her shoulder. For a second, neither of them moved. The wind tugged at his scarf. A dog barked once from under the porch and then went quiet, reading the tension. He broke eye contact first, turning toward the engineers. "Let's get eyes on the relay station. I want to be back here before dark." They tramped up the hill toward the weather shack, the structure sitting lonely on a rise where her father had once strung a windmill. From a distance, it looked like any other utility building. Up close, the thick cables snaking into the ground and the discrete satellite dishes told another story. Inside the shack, machinery hummed, and racks of gear blinked with green lights. One of the engineers launched into a report on encrypted data flows and early warning feeds, pointing at diagrams. Mara stood near the doorway, warmth from the electronics on one side, the bite of the wind on the other. She listened as best she could, but the jargon slid off. What stuck was simpler. This little hut was how the people in the valley knew when someone dangerous was coming long before engines echoed through the passes. "Threat profile is minimal," the intel officer said, flicking through slides. "We've picked up some increased chatter from across the border. Talk about neutralizing eyes in the sky, something they're calling a white theater test, but our assessment is that any contact will be probing, not decisive. Most likely, they are just testing how quickly we respond to winter incursions." "White theater," Mara repeated under her breath, rolling the words around like a pebble in her mouth. Sounded like something an outsider would name these mountains. "Pretty detached." Hayes glanced at her. "You have something to add?" "People who joke about this place rarely last long in it," she said. "They freeze their faces off trying." "It's not a joke," the intel officer protested. It's a code name for... She knows it's not a joke, Lieutenant, Hayes said. She just prefers her mountains the way they are. There was that undercurrent again between them. Old, unfinished. He turned away before she could reply. Later, in the ranch kitchen, the table was cleared of plates and set instead with maps and tablets. The stove crackled, sending out waves of heat. Steam fogged the single-pane windows. Soldiers crowded around with mugs of coffee between their hands, cheeks still red from the outside air. The intel officer tapped the valley on the map. Tomorrow morning, we send a recon platoon to run a loop up from the ranch, along this side of the ridge, past the relay station, and back by midday. Visual confirmation of no enemy presence. Deter any opportunists who might be scouting. Routine overwatch. Babysitting a weather shed. One of the sergeants quipped. Best duty I've had all month. We'll take turns napping in the shack, another joked. Fastest response time of anyone in the theater, if you count rolling out of a cot. Laughter rippled. It wasn't mean-spirited, just the kind of griping humor that fit any mission that looked too easy on paper. Mara stood at the counter, half turned away, but her eyes stayed on the contour lines. She reached forward, fingers brushing the paper. Your route here, she said, tracing the planned path along the valley floor, puts you under this spur for longer than you think. Snow loads differently under it. You'll be in the shadow until the sun clears the ridge. Anyone up high? They'll see you long before you see them. The intel officer frowned a little. Our satellite imagery. Can't see wind, she said. Can't feel where the snow's crusted and where it's powder over rock. There's an old cattle trail on this side of the spur. She tapped a line not drawn on the map, running higher along the slope. It gives you better cover and keeps you off the clean valley floor. How do you know there's a trail there? One of the younger soldiers asked, skeptical but curious. Because I've ridden it every spring since I was tall enough to get in the saddle, she said. If it's buried, you read it off the trees and the way the drifts sit. It's there. Hayes watched her quietly, eyes following her finger as it traced the invisible line. His jaw shifted slightly, some memory tugging at him. Then he straightened. Noted, he said. We'll adjust the route. The intel officer hesitated. So, the original path gives us clearer sight lines. Sight lines for who? Mara asked. You, on a map? Or someone with a rifle up here? She tapped the ridge. The officers exchanged looks. Hayes cut through it. We brought her on for a reason. If she says the snow hides a trail, it hides a trail. The tension in his voice wasn't just about tomorrow. It reached back to another briefing, another table, another local's advice ignored. After the meeting broke, the platoon lingered in the kitchen. One of the squad leaders nodded toward Mara's rifle leaning against the wall. So you really hit those plates at 400? He asked. Sergeant said he watched you out there. She shrugged. If the wind behaves. The rancher who thinks she's a sniper, another joked. Guess you'll be pointing out all our misses tomorrow. She let the jab roll off. If you're missing out there, it's not because of me, she said. It's because you think the snow's your friend. Jokes turned to other topics. Someone dealt cards. Someone else complained about frozen toes. Mara drifted toward the mudroom, pulling on her coat again. Outside, the sky had changed. A line of clouds sat low on the horizon, fat and dark, dragging a veil behind it across the mountains. The on-base weather tech had called it light snow, good visibility, earlier, tracing model runs on a tablet. Mara knew that line meant more than models said. She watched it for a long time, hand on the railing, listening to the creak of the porch boards under her weight. Later, she walked up toward the relay station alone. Snow squeaked under her boots. The air had that waiting feeling, like a held breath. Near the shack, she crouched to study tracks in the snow. Boot prints. Not military issue. Not ranch hands either. The spacing was wrong, steps deliberately misaligned, extra prints where someone had stopped for no good reason. Nearby, snowmobile tracks doubled back on themselves in tight loops, as if the riders had been circling, mapping, measuring. She ran gloved fingers along one of the depressions. The snow here was packed down, crusted from repeated passes. To either side, it lay looser, untouched, Too perfect. She went back with photos and notes. The analyst at the comm station glanced at them, nodded, then shrugged. Smugglers, he said, or hunters. Either way, nothing we can hit without causing an incident. We'll log it, we watch it, we move on. They're not just passing through, she said. They are pacing it, feeling it, making sure they know what holds and what slides. Noted, Quinn, he said, already turning to another screen. We've got bigger fish up north at the moment. By the time she sat back on the ranch porch that night, the sky had gone flat gray. The lights from the house cast a warm rectangle on the snow. Voices and laughter seeped through the walls. Soldiers trading stories, the clink of mugs. She sat alone, rifle barrel across her knees, a rag in one hand, a strip of oilcloth in the other. She checked each magazine by touch more than sight, counting the rounds. Her mind rolled that line from the analyst over and over. Bigger fish, as if these ridges weren't sharp enough to cut you to the bone. Her father's voice came back unbidden, from years before. These mountains are honest killers, kiddo. They don't pretend to be anything else. People are the sneaky ones. She looked toward the relay station, a small, square shadow on the hill. In the distance, beyond the last of the fences, the mountains loomed, their backs to the stars, holding their secrets under the snow. Morning arrived bright, brittle, and cold enough that your breath felt like it might shatter on the air. The patrol assembled in the yard, men and women in white over whites and digital camouflage, rifles slung, goggles pushed up on helmets. Their breath steamed in short bursts. Metal clinked softly as they adjusted straps and checked weapons. Someone stamped their feet, wringing a bit of life into toes stiff with cold. Mara walked just off the main group, close enough to hear the squad leaders pass murmured instructions, far enough to read the snow where their boots hadn't churned it yet. The air tasted metallic again, but fresher, cleaner. The sky was a pale, hard blue. The cloud line from the night before had grown, a smear along the horizon. Up above, the little drone buzzed, a faint mosquito whine. Its camera feed bounced through the war room, giving remote viewers a clean, detached overhead view, a line of dots leaving the safety of the ranch and threading their way uphill. It was the kind of morning that would have been beautiful on any other day. Mara watched the ground. The track she had seen yesterday had multiplied. More boots, more snowmobile treads. Some were old, edges softened by wind. Others were sharp, fresh. She noticed where they concentrated and where the snow remained mysteriously untouched, an unbroken sheet you could lay a tablecloth over. The patrol moved toward the valley. Above them, the ridgeline cast long blue shadows across the floor. The planned route, adjusted after the kitchen briefing, took them higher along the flank, away from the most obvious open ground. Still, to reach the relay station, they would have to cross the mouth of the bowl. She stopped at the edge of the depression and swept her gaze across it, reading like she'd read a page. Snow crust thick hay. Thin there. A faint dip where weight had compressed. A ripple where wind had banked it deliberately. The valley floor was too clean. It had the tidy look of a pasture someone had just dragged. No random drift lines. No old snowmobile grooves where smugglers or ranch hands had cut across. The untouched areas were where transients usually went. The places everyone had used for years were suspiciously disturbed, as if someone had stomped all over them to make them more appealing. "This feels wrong," she said quietly. The platoon leader, walking a few steps ahead, turned back. Frost clung to the edges of his balaclava. "What do you mean?" "They've been hurting you without you realizing it," she said. She pointed with her chin. "Tracks up on the sides, pack trail under that overhang. Nothing through the middle. They want you in the open where the snow looks friendly." His eyes flicked from her to the valley, then back. "Our adjusted path keeps us higher," he said, but there was uncertainty now. "If we swing even higher, we might blow the timing on the loop." "You blow the timing. The relay station gets checked an hour later," she said. "You go out there, you might not come back at all." He chewed that over, gaze furrowing. "I'll call it in," he said finally, and tapped his headset. Echo 11 to War Room, recommending further adjustment to route, valley floor looks. The crack of the first shot cut through his words like a whip. The sound rolled down from the ridge above, echoing between the slopes. The point man, 30 yards ahead, jerked as if yanked by an invisible rope. His legs went out from under him. He dropped into the snow and slid a few feet before coming to rest on his side, motionless. "Contact! Contact! Contact!" someone shouted. "Sniper! High! High on the ridge!" Everything that had felt wide and open suddenly felt too close. Machine guns roared from both sides of the valley, the flat rapid bark of belt-fed weapons. Snow around them exploded into flurries as rounds chewed into drifts and rocks. "Down!" the platoon leader yelled. "Get down! Find cover!" There was precious little. The valley floor offered small rocks, shallow depressions, slight undulations. Men and women threw themselves behind whatever they could, digging into the snow with their hands, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Up in the war room, the drone feed jittered as the operator fought to keep the lens steady. On the map overlay, red diamonds bloomed along the ridgeline. Enemy positions triangulated from muzzle flashes and radio intercepts. Lines of fire arced down into the bowl, crisscrossing, overlapping. The blue icons marking the patrol huddled together, trapped inside. "Jesus," someone whispered. They walked right into it. Echo 1-1, this is war room. Execute break Sierra. Pop smoke and bound back to the east spur. Acknowledge, Hayes said into his MIC, his tone more urgent now. Echo 1-1, acknowledge. Static. A few chopped syllables. Gunfire overwhelming the microphones. On one helmet cam, a mortar round landed 50 meters away, kicking up a geyser of snow and black earth. The camera view was briefly nothing but white. When it cleared, a squad leader lay twisted, his leg at a wrong angle, the snow around him spattered. "Mortars bracketing," the fire's officer said. "They are walking it in. First round long, second short. And the third." Hayes muttered. The third landed closer, showering the medic and his patient with shrapnel and snow. The medic screamed, then swore he was fine, and went back to work, hands moving faster. Mara, pressed behind a rock the size of a duffel bag, peered through the narrow gap between it and the ground. Up valley, the farmhouse hunched under its snow load, smoke still drifting from the chimney. Through the scope she'd slung around her neck more out of habit than expectation, she glimpsed movement in the windows, faces, hands pulling boards tighter, a small shape clinging to a larger one. "They are too close," she murmured. "What?" The squad's radio operator had slithered in next to her, pressing hard against her side to share the minimal cover. "The mortars," she said. "If they chase us up valley, those rounds will fall right through that house." "We have orders to break toward the east spur," the radio operator said, almost defensively, as if anticipating her objection. "Route Sierra, move under smoke." "Route Sierra runs right where someone packed the snow for you," she answered. "See those footprints? That trail? They've got guns sighted along it. You follow doctrine, you die in order." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand white-knuckled on the radio handset. Above them, the little drone tried to climb higher for a better view. On its feed, the interference overlay bloomed. The picture fuzzed, then striped, then froze. "So, satellite links degrading fast over the valley," the comms tech said. "The jammer bubble is fully formed now. We're flying blind from here on the drone side. Can you reposition it around the bubble?" Hayes asked, "Not without losing it completely. We'd be lucky to keep telemetry." "Keep it. Pull it back. We need what eyes we have." On the valley floor, smoke grenades popped, belching plumes of colored fog into the air. The wind tore at them, spreading them thin. Men and women moved in short, desperate dashes from scrap to scrap of cover, dragging wounded, diving, scrambling. A mortar round hit short of the farmhouse, showering its front with snow and earth. Boards rattled. The little girl Mara had seen before screamed, though the sound didn't carry all the way to her hideout. It carried enough in her memory. The cloud line along the horizon took its cue and moved in, as if cold. Wind picked up. Fine snow began to blow in sheets, reducing visibility by degrees. The sun lost some of its bite, retreating behind thin, gray wisps. Storm's coming faster, Mara muttered. Maybe that's good, the radio operator said. Cuts their sight lines. An hour's, she said. In the war room, the weather tech pointed with a pen at the overlay. Visibility dropping in the next 30 minutes. If we don't get the patrol moving soon, any extraction birds will be pushing into low ceilings and high crosswinds. We have a window now. It's closing. On the main screen, Hayes watched a medic fumble with a tourniquet, fingers numb, blood soaking the snow. He watched the blue icons huddle tighter under fire that never seemed to slacken. He watched the farmhouse tremble under another near miss. Echo 1-1. This is War Room, he said again, a trace of something like desperation in his tone now. You will execute Break Sierra. That route is your best chance. Do you copy? In the snow-choked bowl, Mara heard only fragments of that, chopped to nonsense by the jammer. She saw the platoon leader's face tighten as he weighed what little he'd heard against what he could see. We have to move, he shouted to those closest to him. Route Sierra. Pop everything you've got. Mara grabbed his sleeve. That path is a slaughter line, she said. You go that way. You'll walk into guns you can't even see. Then where? He snapped. Not unkindly, but the strain took some of the polish off. We can't dig in here and wait for them to walk the mortars onto us. There's nowhere to go. Up above, the ridgeline loomed. Between two outcrops, halfway up, Mara could barely make out the mouth of a gully no one ever used for grazing. Too steep, too narrow, too dangerous when the snow loaded heavy. Her father had pointed at it once and said, "That chute will kill you if you don't understand it. It'll also save you if you do." She looked from the gully to the farmhouse, then to the patrol. Somewhere in the distance, beyond all of that, she could feel the war room's attention pressing against her back, unaware of where her eyes had gone. The wind brought the first grains of snow stinging into their faces. Time was running out. The relay station sat up on its hill, blinking data into the ether. Higher Command's message crackled through Hayes' headset, crisp in his ear despite everything. If you lose that relay and that platoon, you're blind in that sector for 6 hours, Colonel. You understand me? That's a hole big enough to drive an armored brigade through. He understood. He also understood that none of the textbook answers would fit in the space where they were standing. Not with jamming, not with civilians in the arc, not with the storm wrapping its fingers around the valley. Back in the war room, surrounded by screens that couldn't show him the one thing he needed most, Hayes turned slowly. His gaze sought the one person in the room who wasn't watching from afar. Mara's locator icon was pinned at the edge of the kill box. The little triangle blinked, a heartbeat on the screen. "What do you have?" he asked her, voice steady with effort. She saw again the valley map, the ridgeline, the cable-thin line of the avalanche chute. She saw the cattle trails they'd mapped in her head, the snow load she'd studied every winter, the way the mountains breathed under their white skin. "You won't steer them out from here," she said. "You'll steer them into deeper trouble. You need someone up above, breaking the box from the top down." "From where?" he demanded. "We can't get a team up that ridge under fire in time. We don't even know all their positions." "I do," she said. "They are in the same places a man would put cattle if he wanted to keep them penned but moving. High ground near the spur. Overwatch on the shallow side. Mortars tucked behind that false crest. They think this gully," she tapped the map, at the narrow white scar between two rock symbols, "is impassable. It's not. That chute's a sheer climb," the operations major said. "We flagged it as a no-go on our route plans. Too dangerous, too unstable. Too dangerous for people who don't live here," she said. "I've been in and out of it since I was 14. You kick the right steps, you use the rock under the snow, it'll take you up behind them. You expect me to send a squad up there?" Hayes demanded. "In this weather? With mortars walking in?" "I expect you to send me," she said. The room went very still. "You're not under my command," he said flatly. "You're a contracted guide. I'm the only one on this base who knows that gully well enough to climb it fast without dying," she said. "You send anyone else, you lose them on the wall and you still lose the platoon." "That's not how this works," the operations major said. "We can't just sign off on a civilian going on a solo combat mission. Liability alone." Liability. Mara barked a humorless laugh. There's a family up there who didn't ask to have mortars dropped on their roof. They are my neighbors on that valley floor. You talking about liability doesn't change the fact they're dying right now because you walked them into a box. Hayes flinched, just a flicker. It reminded him of a younger man in another valley, another time, sitting at another table, telling another local he couldn't deviate from the plan because there were procedures. Rules of engagement, risk matrices. Mortars bracketed then, too. Even if I said yes, he said slowly, I can't control what happens once you're up there. We'll have no comms with you in that bubble. You'll be alone, Quinn. I've been alone in those mountains my whole life, she said. Difference is, this time someone might actually benefit from it. The monitors behind him showed a new mortar impact dangerously near the farmhouse. One of the windows blew out in a spray of glass and snow. The feed cut out a second later, the camera shuddering. How many more rounds you want to watch before you admit the book isn't enough? She asked. He stared at her. The staff looked between them like spectators at a knife fight. It wasn't just about the valley anymore. It was about that day years ago when her father had ridden into a different storm on Hayes' orders and not come back. How many times are you going to ignore a Quinn? She asked softly, before the mountains decide you're not worth listening to either. That hit. His eyes flared, then narrowed. His jaw worked. Then he exhaled, long and slow, like he was blowing out the last of his certainty. What you're proposing violates every coordination protocol we have, he said. Solo movement, no positive comms, no backup. If you get pinned or taken, we don't even have a status, let alone a way to pull you out. Then don't plan for my rescue, she said. Plan for theirs. He closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. When he opened them, his decision was already made. Get her what she needs, he said. Rifle, ammo, climbing gear. Anything she asks for. Log it under my name. The objections came, muted but present. He ignored them. Mara didn't look at anyone else. She stepped to the side table, pulled open drawers, and began to build the load she'd need. She left behind anything that wasn't essential. Heavy armor that would slow her climb. Extra comforts. Redundant tools. She kept the rifle she trusted, full magazines, a coil of rope, 2 ice tools, a small radio with fresh batteries. She added a handful of smoke grenades, because smoke could do more than obscure. It could misdirect, confuse, blind at the right moment. She shrugged into a climbing harness, the straps worn but strong. She cinched it with practiced hands. The quartermaster, who'd watched ranch kids grow into adults on this land, wordlessly passed her a pair of old crampons from a crate. She clipped them to her pack. As she swung through the war room on her way out, Hayes caught her arm for a moment. When my men talk to you on that radio, he said, voice low, they will call you by your first name. But in my head, I'm calling you something else. Fool, she suggested. Liability. Asset, he said. One I should have listened to sooner. She held his gaze. There was a lot in that look. Anger, grief, guilt, a shard of something like respect. She nodded once. Then don't make the same mistake from behind this desk, she said. If I say they need to move, don't wait for a second opinion. He let go. She turned and walked, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on her back. Outside, the wind had picked up, blowing powder in thin veils across the open ground. The snowcat's engine growled, ready. She climbed aboard, pack biting into her shoulders, rifle snug against her chest. They rolled out, treads grinding across ice. The base shrank behind them. Ahead, the mountains grew, filling her vision. The mouth of the valley yawned like a white wound. At the last point vehicles could reasonably go, the driver throttled down. This is as far as I can take you, he shouted over the engine and wind. Fine, she said. She hopped off, boots punching into the snow. Cold climbed her legs. She adjusted her pack, checked her rifle's safety, and started toward the slope that led to the gully. The climb began in earnest where the world dropped away under her feet. She strapped the crampons onto her boots, the metal spikes biting into ice under a thin crust of snow. She clipped the ice tools to her wrists with short leashes. Above her, The gully rose narrow and steep, its walls close, snow filling it like poured cement. The sky was just a strip of pale blue overhead. She kicked steps into the snow, testing each one before committing her weight. Under the powder, sometimes she felt rock, solid and reassuring. Sometimes she felt nothing, just more snow. She probed, learned, adjusted. Wind funneled down the gully, bringing sounds from the valley in strange, distorted fragments. The distant thud of mortars, the ghost of a shouted command, the occasional crack of a rifle. It all felt far away, like a storm on another horizon. Halfway up, the first gust of blown snow hit her full in the face, stinging like sand. Visibility narrowed to a few yards. The walls on either side loomed. She clawed her way higher, muscles burning, lungs pulling in air so cold it hurt. At one point, her left crampon skidded on hidden ice. Her weight sagged onto her arms. The ice tools sank deeper, their picks squealing against rock before biting. She hung there for a moment, heart thundering in her ears, then slowly eased herself back into a stable stance. She dragged the scope of her rifle against the rock as she moved. A sharp crack and a crunch made her head whip around. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the outer lens. She swore under her breath. Not loud, just enough that the valley could hear. Maybe. She wiped away loose shards with the edge of a glove, careful not to cut herself. The inner glass was intact, but the distortion would be there, subtle and treacherous. Fine, she muttered. We'd do this the hard way then. She would have to get closer than she liked, work with shorter shots at angles a standard manual would frown at. It was a problem, but not an unsolvable one. She thumbed the radio clip to her harness, more out of habit than hope. War room, this is Quinn, she said, voice barely above a murmur, as if the rocks could eavesdrop. I'm in the gully. Climb is slow but holding. Any traffic? Static hissed back, then a fragment of a word. Quinn, red, you, broken. She smiled despite herself. Story of my life, she said quietly. Say again, Quinn. Came Hayes' voice in her ear, chopped but recognizable. You're lost, unreadable. I said I'm doing it my way, Colonel, she replied, though she knew only pieces would get through. Just keep them alive a little longer. Down in the valley, the patrol huddled deeper behind whatever cover they'd found. Smoke grenades had bought them only seconds at a time. Machine guns spat from the ridgeline with mechanical patience. Mortars thumped at a steady rhythm. Ammunition counters in HUDs ticked down. Sir, they are down to their last belts on the medium machine gun, the fires officer reported. Rifle ammo is adequate for now, but they can't keep this up indefinitely. Medics are running out of tourniquets and clotting agents. Extraction birds. Hayes asked without taking his eyes off the main feed. Pilots report increasing crosswind and lowering ceiling, the air liaison said. We push them in now. We're floating with icing in that valley. We wait too long. They won't be able to get in at all. He juggled those numbers in his head. Time, ammo, weather. None of them were on his side. Above and to the side of all of that, Mara hauled herself up over the last lip of the gully and onto the ridge. For a moment, she just lay there, chest heaving, arms trembling with fatigue. The wind hit her full on now, sliding under her collar, raking ice crystals across her face. The valley spread out below, a vast bowl of white ringed by dark rock, smoke hanging in pale threads over the patrol's position. She rolled onto her stomach and crawled forward until she could see over the edge. The enemy had dug in like someone who took their work seriously. In shallow scrapes along the ridge, machine gun teams worked with cold efficiency, swapping barrels, feeding belts. Near a cluster of stunted pines, a makeshift sniper hide sat tucked into a notch, its shooter glassing the valley with a long scope, occasionally firing a single, precise round. Farther back, behind a low crest, a mortar pit operated like a factory line. One man dropping shells into the tube, another adjusting the bipod, a third checking a laminated chart. Nearby, under a camouflaged net, a truck hunkered, its antenna array jutting like insect feelers into the gray air. Cables ran from it to a cluster of folding tables where men hovered over radios and maps. She had seen cattle pens that looked like this. Gaps where buses stood. Paths where the herd could be driven. Points where a single, well-placed cut could scatter the whole thing. She slid back from the edge, out of sight, and closed her eyes for a moment, building the picture in her head. Priorities sorted themselves without effort. First, the eye that saw everything. Then the mouths that spat the most teeth. Then the hands that pointed, the ones with radios, the ones whose shirts everyone else's eyes followed. The jammer, the mortar, the RPG crews lining up to send rounds toward the farmhouse. She breathed in. The cold seared her lungs. The aches in her muscles faded into the background. Then she began to move. She belly-crawled along the ridgeline, using rocks and blown-in drifts as cover. Every time she passed an outcrop, she took a second to check her angles, making sure she hadn't just shown her profile to someone she hadn't seen yet. She found a hollow behind a boulder that gave her a sliver of view down toward the sniper hide. Through the cracked scope, the world was rippled at the edges, but the center was still clear enough. She adjusted, compensating for the distortion by instinct more than calculus. The enemy sniper leaned in his hide, moving with the lazy confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable here. He shifted, adjusting his view, his body silhouetted for a brief second against the pale rock behind him. Mara let out a slow breath, the way she had on the ranch range. She let the wind push her shot a fraction. Squeezed. The suppressed crack of her rifle was barely audible over the wind. In her scope, the man jerked, then slumped, collapsing into his hide. His rifle slid, barrel knocking against rock and then disappearing. No one noticed for a moment. The machine guns kept up their steady beat. The mortars kept thumping. Only one eye had closed, and the others hadn't realized it yet. She moved, fast, heart pounding now not from fear but from urgency. A machine gun nest sat a dozen yards down the ridge, its crew hunched in their shallow trench. She watched them through a thin smear of frost on the edge of the scope, waited until they paused to reload. Belts empty, hands busy, mouths open as they called for another can. 2 shots, quickly but not hurried. One gunner folded forward over the weapon, the second twisted sideways, hands clutching at his chest. The feeder scrambled, grabbed the gun, tried to pivot it back into line, but his hands shook. Down below, a few soldiers in the patrol noticed the change. The hammering fire that had pinned them from that angle slackened. Heads lifted slightly. "Delta gun, your fire just died," one of the squad leaders said over the net. "What happened up there?" "Unknown," came a strained reply. "We're taking fire from somewhere else." Mara shifted again. An RPG team huddled behind a rock, assembling a launcher. The barrel pointed toward the farmhouse now, not the patrol. She waited until the leader leaned out to sight along it, his head and shoulders exposed. One round. He toppled backward, knocking into his assistant. The launcher clattered to the ground. The remaining men dove for cover, yelling. Up in the war room, the jammer's interference pattern flickered for a heartbeat, a ripple of static in the bubble. A few syllables from the valley broke through. "Contact, ridge, someone's shooting," above them. "Say again, Echo 1-1, Hayes said sharply, leaning toward the MIC, "You have friendly support." "Unknown, war room," came the reply, chopped but understandable. "Rounds coming from high ridge, enemy positions going quiet one by one. We don't know who." An analyst swiveled in his chair. "Sir, we're picking up panic traffic on the enemy net," he said. "They're shouting about a shooter in the rocks above them. They thought this ridge was secure." "Quinn's up there," Hayes said under his breath. "She made it." The jammer's bubble pulsed again. The truck on the ridge whined as its operator adjusted frequencies, trying to clamp down on whatever crack had just been forced into their wall. The operator's colleague, a man with headphones and a fur-lined hood, cursed into his microphone. "Shepard 1, this is Jammer. We have unknown shooter impacting ridge positions. Source unknown. Possible infiltrator or long-range asset. White Theater is compromised," came another voice, distorted by encryption. "Find it and kill it. We still need the data on response time. The local asset can wait." "Copy. Deploy search team." Launch drone. Lock down the ridge. Enemy fighters moved with practice speed. A small team broke off from the mortar pit, slinging rifles and clipping on climbing gear. They began angling up toward where they thought the shots had come from, moving quickly but carefully along the rock shelves. Another man at the command table pulled a case from under his chair, flipped it open, and assembled a compact quadcopter. The little drone's rotors spun up with a rising whine. It lifted, wobbling in the gusty wind, then steadied and buzzed off along the ridge line, camera eye scanning. Mara heard it before she saw it. The distinctive pitch cut through the background noise, worming into her ear. She pressed herself flatter against the rock, eyes searching the gray sky. There, a dark cross silhouetted against the clouds, hovering, drifting, trying to pick up any unnatural lines or movements against the snow. Her ammunition wasn't infinite. Every shot had to matter. Shooting a drone at distance in this wind with a crack scope was something she wouldn't normally voluntarily attempt. But leaving it up there was worse. She palmed a smoke grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, counted, lips moving. She lobbed it into a shallow depression a little to her left, letting it roll and come to rest where it would bleed thick white smoke into the already hazy air. The plume made a pillar that the drone drifted toward, its operator curious. She lined up behind it, using the smoke as both bait and backdrop. The drone's dark shape passed between her and the white cloud, centered in her cracked scope. She squeezed the trigger. The round punched through one of the rotors. The drone jerked, spun, and tumbled, rotors snapping off as it smacked into a rock outcrop and then disappeared over the edge, crashing somewhere in the gully below. The shot echoed different than the others. Louder, closer to some enemy ears. Up there, one of the climber team shouted in their own tongue, pointing. By the boulder. Mara rolled as a burst of rifle fire chewed into the snow where she had been a moment before. Chips of ice stung her cheek. She slid down a short chute, boots scrabbling for purchase, and ducked behind another rock. Shadows moved above her. 3 men, maybe 4, climbing hard now, eyes scanning the rocks for a ripple, a flash, anything. She slowed her breathing. At 50 meters, a rifle was no longer a distant precision tool. It was a scalpel in shaking hands. As the first of the climbers hauled himself over the lip of a shelf, rifle slung across his chest, she let him plant both feet before she fired. The round took him in the chest. Momentum carried him backward into his partner, and they tumbled together, arms and legs flailing, sliding in a spray of snow. The second and third scrambled to the sides, firing blind toward her last position. She crawled sideways, boots and elbows leaving faint tracks, and popped up where they didn't expect, putting another shot into a shoulder, then a knee. They went down, howling, clutching limbs, trying to return fire. She moved again, a ghost on the ridge. Down in the valley, the volume of incoming fire dropped. Not to nothing, far from it, but enough that the patrol could look up, see gaps, feel air where before there had only been weight. Whatever is happening up there, it's our only chance, the platoon leader shouted. We push to the lateral spur now. Move, move. He relayed his intent over the net. The words got chopped and distorted, but some version of them reached the war room. War room, Echo 1-1. He gasped between breaths. Enemy fire, decreasing on western side. Unknown shooter impacting their positions. We're moving towards Spur 3 as briefed. Request guidance and cover if you've got it. Do it, Hayes said. Spur 3 gets you out of the worst of their arcs. We'll shape what we can. His voice came back to Mara in tatters through the radio. She couldn't afford to sort the fragments. She could hear enough in the tone. They were moving. She needed to pry the enemy's fingers off the ridge entirely. The command nuke under the netting drew her eye. Men clustered there, hunched over a folding map weighted with rocks. On its surface, lines and arrows marked routes. One toward the relay station, another snaking down toward a circled square she recognized by its outline as her own ranch. In the margin, a notation, local guide asset. So that was part of it. Not just blinding the relay and measuring response time. They wanted someone who knew these mountains, on camera, saying what they wanted. Her stomach tightened. Her father had warned her that people would always try to turn someone like her into a tool. Not today. She shifted to a new angle, careful to stay below the crest. The commander leaned over the map, gloved hand tapping the line toward the relay. "We still have the relay," he muttered to his radio operator. "We blind them. We kill the patrol. We can still push for the asset later. This test goes ahead." Mara waited. The wind gusted, tugging at the edges of the net. The commander straightened, then leaned back down, his head directly above the circle. The radio operator bent close. She squeezed the trigger. The round punched into the center of his chest. He slammed forward onto the map, rocks skittering away. The operator jerked back, eyes wide, mouth open to shout. Before he could, she shifted slightly and took him too. Panic rippled across the ridge. Without their central voice, squads hesitated. Mortar crews looked up, unsure if they should keep firing or wait. Machine gunners glanced sideways, fingers pausing on triggers. Mara turned her attention to the jammer truck. The antenna array jutted like a skeleton hand against the sky. The metal was narrow, a hard shot in this wind and at this angle, but it was bigger than the drone rotor had been. She took a breath, felt the cracked glass under her eye, adjusted a fraction to account for the distortion. Squeezed. The top section of the antenna sparked and snapped. The entire structure jutted. One of the operators grabbed at the cable too late as it whipped loose, smacking him across the face. The whine of the jammer dropped an octave and then stuttered. In the war room, waveforms flickered, then settled. Bars on the comms console leapt from red to yellow, then to a jittery green. "Sir, interference is collapsing," the comms tech said, astonished. "We're regaining satellite link. Signals from the valley clearing up." "Echo 1-1, this is war room," Hayes said, almost tripping over his own words in his haste. "We have you 5x5. You are cleared to push to Spur 3. Support will be on station in 5. Say again, you are not alone. There's someone on that ridge cutting your ropes for you." Laughter, wild and disbelieving, crackled back from the valley. "Copy, war room," the platoon leader said, voice shaky with adrenaline and something like relief. "We'll send them a thank you card if we make it home." Screens that had been half static now showed a crisp, if snow-blurred, picture. The drone feed, retossed around the edge of the bubble, swung into place, revealing the ridgeline in full. Analysts watched as little puffs of snow marked new impacts. Men fell, others scrambled. And there, along the rocks, a single heat signature moved with deliberate purpose. The room, which had been humming with frantic voices minutes earlier, fell quiet one by one, as if someone were turning down dials. Conversations aborted mid-sentence. Pens stilled. No one told them to hush. They just did, drawn in by the sight of one person changing the shape of a battle. Hay stared at the image, at the blue triangle labeled Quinem now overlapping with the ridgeline, at the red diamonds winking out, at the patrol's icons inching toward the spur, out of the worst of the overlapping arcs. He had seen men perform acts of bravery before. He had read citations that tried to capture moments like this in official language. None of that sat easily with what he saw now. A rancher's daughter, climbing into the kill zone other people had drawn on a map and erasing parts of it with a rifle she cleaned at her kitchen table. For a long heartbeat, the chatter of the enemy net was the only sound in the room, filtered through the intercept system, a rising chorus of panic, anger, calls for retreat. The war room listened to an enemy flounder and an ally breathe again, and said nothing. Stars came out early above the valley, hidden behind the thickening snow. By the time the last enemy rifle had gone silent or disappeared down the far side of the ridge, the storm had deepened. Snow fell in fat flakes, muffling the world. The echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by the soft rush of wind and the occasional groan of settling drifts. On the valley floor, soldiers moved among the wounded, checking pulses, tightening bandages, calling out names. They made hasty stretches from skis and poles. Their voices were low, almost reverent. Above, Mara lay on her back for a moment, looking up at the falling flakes. Her body ached in every joint. Her hands trembled from cold and adrenaline. The cracked scope pressed a faint bruise into her brow. "War room, this is Quinn," she said into the radio, voice hoarse with cold and exertion. "Ridge positions are neutralized. Jammers down. Mortars quiet. If you're going to bring those birds in, now's the time." "Copy, Quinn," Hayes replied immediately. There was warmth in his tone now, somewhere between pride and worry. "Extraction is inbound. You did more than we had any right to ask." "I did what needed doing," she said. "Same as anyone else." He was quiet for a second. "Can you exfiltrate down to the patrol? They are consolidating near Spur 3. We'd like to put you on the same bird if possible." She looked down at the slope. The path she'd taken up was treacherous enough in her current state. Going down another way might be worse. "I'll find my feet," she said lightly. "You just keep the sky open a little longer." Medevac helicopters threaded their way into the valley under the low ceiling, rotors chopping the thick air. They flared above the patrol, snow whipping into halos around them. Wounded were loaded aboard in a flurry of shouted instructions and gloved hands. The family from the farmhouse, faces streaked with soot and fear, were escorted to another bird, eyes darting everywhere but up. From the ridge, Mara watched the shapes lift away, growing smaller, lights blinking through the falling snow. A strange calm settled over her. Later, after she'd half climbed, half slid down a safer line and been bundled into a vehicle, after medics had checked her for cuts and frostbite and urged her to drink something hot, she found herself back on her own porch. The storm had broken. The sky to the west glowed with the last light of day, staining the snow faint pink and gold. The fields lay quiet. The only signs of recent upheaval were the tracks and churned-up drifts where vehicles had come and gone. Inside the house, there were voices, muted now, tired. Someone laughed, the sound edged with disbelief. She heard clinking mugs, the rattle of cutlery. Celebration, of a sort. Survival. She sat on the back step, hand bandaged where a shard of rock had sliced her palm. Her rifle leaned against the railing, wiped down, oiled. Her breath rose in small clouds. She looked toward the ridge where she'd climbed. From here, it looked the same as it always had. White, distant, indifferent. If you didn't know better, you'd think nothing had happened up there at all. Footsteps creaked on the kitchen floor. The door opened. Colonel Hayes stepped out, closing it quietly behind him. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. He had shed his body armor, but exhaustion still weighed him down like extra plates. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "No way else to be," she replied. He sat down on the step beside her, a little awkward in the way of men not used to being off their feet with nothing to do with their hands. He clasped his gloves together in his lap. "The medics clear you?" he asked. "I've got all my fingers and toes," she said. "Everything else will complain for a while, then get over it." He huffed a short laugh. Then it faded. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I made sure the report doesn't read like this was doctrine that worked." "That might surprise some people," she said. "Paper likes to paint pretty pictures. Hire wants to hang a success label on it," he admitted. "Say our Overwatch systems detected the threat, our adaptive response neutralized it. All neat and tidy. They like the term white theater now that they've heard it. Think it sounds modern. Sounds like a soap brand," she said. "Or a tourist brochure." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I told them it only worked because a Quinn ignored us twice," he said. "Once, by you. Once, years ago, by your father." She went still. "I stuck to the book that day," he said, staring out at the ridge. "He told me the weather was turning faster than my charts said. He told me the pass I wanted to use had a way of shedding snow when there was too much weight on it. I had models and forecasts and a directive from people who'd never set foot here. I chose that over his gut. We went anyway." Snow squeaked under her boots as she shifted, but she didn't speak. "Halfway through that pass, the slope let go," he continued, voice rough. "Came down like a wall. We were lucky. We lost only one vehicle. Only a few lives. One of them was him." She remembered the day, not in detail, like he did, but in feelings, the unnatural silence afterward, the way neighbors' faces had closed up, the tightness around a mother's mouth, the empty chair at the table. She'd been younger, still growing into her boots. He didn't die because he was wrong, Hayes said. He died because I couldn't make myself break the plan in time. Because I was too proud of my maps. She turned her head, watching his profile. Today, he said, I had a chance to make the same mistake. The plan said Route Sierra. The book said don't send a civilian up a wall with a rifle. The risk matrices said a lot of things. And yet, she said, and yet. He exhaled. A little cloud formed, drifted, vanished. I almost told you no again. Almost watched those dots on the screen go dark while I argued about protocol. If you hadn't pushed, he swallowed. If you hadn't thrown my failure with your father back in my face, he meant. I'm sorry, he said, the words simple, unadorned. For then. For now. For both times. She looked back toward the ridge. The wind had already smoothed over some of her footprints. In a day, there would be no sign she'd ever been there, at least on the surface. The mountains don't care about sorry, she said. They remember weight, not words. I know, he said. I also know I'm the one who has to live with the fact that, left to my own devices, I'd have lost that patrol today. That family, that relay. You saved them. Against our better judgment. Your better judgment, she corrected gently. Mine was just different. He huffed another laugh, small and real this time. Different, he agreed. From now on, when someone writes a manual for this place, they'd better put your name in the index. Please don't, she said, making a face. Last thing I need is kids showing up at my door with pamphlets asking for the Quinn method like I'm running a workshop. There will be commendations, he said. Medals. Maybe more. There's talk of formalizing a liaison position, local Overwatch specialist. You'd be on the books. Paid regularly. Given, some say. She was quiet for a long moment. And what would that cost? She asked. You be called on, he said. Often. Not always for things you agree with. You be carrying the weight of knowing when we're about to screw up and trying to stop us. And when you do your job too well, half of us will take it for granted. So I be doing what I did today, she said. Just with paperwork. And with a little more protection in writing, he said. We can't make this place safe, but we can admit we don't understand it alone. She turned the idea over. The porch boards creaked softly as she shifted her boot. I don't need a badge to keep an eye on my own backyard, she said finally. I'll keep doing what needs doing, regardless of what you call it. He nodded, as if he'd expected that. Then at least let me promise this, he said. Next time someone who's walked these hills longer than I've worn this uniform says the snow smells wrong, I'll listen faster. She let that sit, then nodded once. That's all I was asking today, she said. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the light fade. Somewhere behind them, someone put music on low. The hum of conversation rose and fell. On base, in the war room, monitors replayed the ridge footage in slow motion. Single shots, enemy silhouettes falling, the antenna snapping, the mortar crew scattering. Voices in the background discussed specifics, how the jammer had been configured, what the enemy maps revealed, about their intent to seize the relay and a local guide for propaganda. They also talked about awards, citations, recommendations. Names were typed into drafts. Some of those names were expected. One, less so. Mara's own interest in those conversations was thin. She had never been much for ceremonies. An hour later, after Hayes had gone back inside to argue with higher-ups about how much to admit in the official story, she slid off the step, picked up her rifle, and walked out to the range again. The gongs on the hill waited, mute metal against the white. The air had gone even colder, the stars sharper. Her breath hung low in front of her. She lay back down behind the bench, cheek against the stock, hands wrapping around the familiar shape. Her palm throbbed where it had been bandaged. She settled in anyway. Downrange, the targets were just shapes in the dusk. She looked through the cracked scope, noting how the fracture caught the starlight, scattering it into faint webs. She'd get the glass replaced. Tomorrow, or the day after. For now, she had to learn how it bent the world, because that's what you did when something you relied on changed. You adapted or you wasted time wishing it hadn't. She picked a plate, breathed in, breathed out, let the day's noise fade. The mortars, the shouts, the hum of screens, the whine of rotors, the silence that had fallen over the war room when they'd realized who had really been watching over that valley. In that silence, something had shifted. Not just in Hayes. In the whole chain of people who'd watched from that dim, cluttered room and understood, maybe for the first time, that their maps were only as good as the person who could read the snow beneath them. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang. A heartbeat later, the steel sang back. Somewhere beyond the ranch, men would write reports about white theater and response times and Overwatch effectiveness. They would calculate how quickly helicopters had launched, how many rounds had been expended, how much data they had gathered on the enemy's winter tactics. They would not be able to quantify the moment when the war room fell silent, not out of fear or failure, but because, for once, everyone in it understood exactly who had tilted the balance and chose, collectively, to shut up and listen. Mara worked the bolt, loaded another round, and aimed again, eyes on the snow, hands steady despite the ghost that would never quite leave her alone.